Good evening, workshoppers. We've got another episode that we're going to go through and do here. I'll give you 5 guesses to figure out what the topic's going to be. Don't look at the actual show title because it gives it away. But yeah, obviously we've got a lot to talk about for Diablo 4. There's still stuff that we're kind of unpacking and like building upon from BlizzCon, but we actually have gotten quite a bit of information over the last, even just the last couple of weeks. Blizzard's been, pretty on the ball as far as going through and doing updates like they said they were going to. It was more from at BlizzCon, they were saying that it was going to be like more like quarterly updates on the development process. And then now we've just had our second and a rather large update as far as system design goes. And to go through and kind of dig into this, because I know itemization and such is something that is very dear to this gentleman's heart. I've brought along Dredscythe here to go through and help me through this one with the system design itemization blog, because I'm sure that you've got a lot to say. You didn't just record a 2-hour video recently going and talking about itemization, other things of that nature. No.
It's actually it's like almost everything. And I kind of cover itemization because I have to, because I would be derelict in my duties if I didn't.
Yeah. And then also they're going through and they're talking about it in chat right now, and there is a little bit of a lore thing that we can go through and talk about. And now, well, do you want to do like the weekend gaming, the how's your season going, the introductions and stuff like that, or should I just jump straight into this question?
We can do that. We'll keep it short. And then we can jump into the lore aspect. We can give people, something interesting.
Okay.
I'll let you fluster out whatever you want to fluster out first.
Okay. All right. I'll hold it in for just a little bit.
Don't pop the cherry yet. Yep, don't do it.
There's so many. You say don't pop the cherry, and there's so many jokes that enter my head, and none of them I can say without getting banned on Twitch. So we're just gonna go. We're just gonna go straight into it. So, Dred, how has your season 19 been going?
It has been the most laziest Demon Hunter season I've ever had, and I could not care less, but in a good way. Like, just yesterday, I hit Paragon 800. It was only because when I was assigning the points, I'm like, oh yeah, I've reached the lazy point of Paragon point assignment. I can just put it all in the main stat now. I
you don't have to tab through screens. It's like,
yeah, it's amazing. If you take more, if you allow yourself to take more than just the opening weekend to get to 800, when that happens,
it's 300%. It's 300% more efficient because I just have to hit open one tab and then hit OK, and then I'm done.
I've reached that Leviathan efficiency Paragon point assignment. But no, the season itself is fun. The game refuses to give me a ancient Carly's point or an ancient Yang's, and by refuses to give me, I mean any. Not even a bad one, just any. But then again, that's how things usually work out when I play DH. It's getting an ancient weapons should be easy, probability wise, but the game just likes to go up your hoo-ha with my little ding-along.
I have a similar problem. I've been playing Crusader and just trying to get an ancient pig sticker. I got a primal what's the other weapon? Dang it, the other sword that Crusaders can roll. The one that freezes you below 20% health.
Oh, Reinhardt?
No, it's like the Wong King Do, I think it is.
Oh.
Yeah, I got a primal one of those, and then I got 5 ancients of that dagger before I actually got one somewhat usable ancient pig sticker.
Yeah, I haven't gotten any ancients at all.
The game refuses to give me crimsons. So I'm gonna say my season has been great, except for the fact that it took 8 full sets of bounties before I got the crimson set pattern. Literally, I got
only 8?
Yeah, I got, well, no, not 8 sets of bounties, 8 full games worth of bounties. So 40 acts worth of bounties in order to go through and get the Captain Crimsons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna say, like, there are some people on the forums that would love your luck on that one.
Yeah, no, it's like I did 40 acts worth of bounties before I freaking got the Captain Crimsons. It's probably actually a little bit more than that because we got it like halfway through, and it was it was just, you know, it was like I got everything else, you know, like 12 bounties in, you know, and then it went from number 13 to 40 before I got the one last remaining pattern. You know, tons of odious collectors and vault runs and stuff like that. Just nothing. Oh god, that was painful.
Well, at least you had all those act mats to
Quiet. No.
to make
No,
to make
there is
to
no
make
silver lining to this dark cloud.
well, no. See, it's like y'all's crafting materials to make the crimsons to just have to settle on a regular legendary version because all the ancient versions still rolled badly.
I did thankfully have relatively good luck. I think I only crafted like 10 of each, you know, like straight statistical, you know, 10 of each in order to get an ancient in both of them. I mean, it's just a pants and a belt, so you don't need anything spectacular to roll well, and so yeah, it rolled well.
Yeah. I did a belt and boots for the UE set. I looked out on the belt being ancient, but the boots aren't. Yeah, that's it. Just playing when the guys are on.
Eagle Singh says he got the bounty early. Well, good for you. I'm so happy. Well, this is a complete change though, because like last season, I think I got it before we even finished like the full set of bounties for the chapter completion. I got it like in Act 2. You know, so this was my penance.
Well, this is the first season of the pattern change, right?
No, it was last season.
Oh, okay. Because I didn't remember.
Yeah, they introduced it in season 18, I believe. I don't think it was season 17.
I don't remember. A lot has happened since then.
Yeah.
You know, like BlizzCon, Diablo 4, lore being bastardized potentially. Hey, yeah, let's get into that.
Well, just to go through and finish it up, you know, I finally went through and I finished season 19. It of course it started on like the worst possible weekend when I had special events running through Saturday, Sunday, and then on Monday. So, and then, you know, going into a pretty busy week, and then the week after that, of course, was Thanksgiving and all this other types of stuff. It was just like, oh, come on, give me a break. And
you probably had to deal with Frozen too along the way.
Yeah. No, that was lots of fun. I actually, God, I watched it like the first 30 minutes of Frozen 2 like 5 times this morning because we had audio issues in one of the auditoriums. But that's a different story. That's a completely different story.
That's for the post show.
Yeah. What was it? You know, besides the issue with the Captain Crimsons, it's doing really good. You know, the seasonal bonus is like a lot of fun and it's really powerful. I think I've cleared a 107. You know, with a moderately okay geared Crusader. You know, without spectacular rolls and like just a single augment and stuff, and not even like the best quality gems. And you know, the Valor set is stupid, you know, in terms of its power. But it you know, it's been a pretty fun, interesting season. I think the thing for me is I've got a couple of my real life friends to actually like kind of like play and stick with the season, and so it's helped me like stick further past going through and getting Guardian and just like playing to hang out and have fun with them. Though tomorrow,
when was the last time you, excuse my language, fucking did that? Because I have to look like, oh my god, 9's on, and then I come on play like, oh my god, 9's on again.
Yeah,
it's like this is like, wow, 9 has like a somewhat normal life again.
Very pseudo, because you'll probably notice like, you know, I'm on at like 9 o'clock at night. You know, so, but then we're recording this on Thursday, December 5th. You know, I know it's a Thursday instead of a Wednesday, but we are what is it? The Diablo 2 ladder resets tomorrow, December 6th. and so that's probably going to be the weekend is going to be taken up by that. A couple of my group, has D2. One of them like has to just go through and like reinstall it, and one of them is on the fence about purchasing it. I'm seeing if I can try and get them, for the D2 ladder reset. It's not as big of like having to start immediately like with the season, and I am working late tomorrow, so I won't even be home when the ladder itself resets. But I'm hoping to maybe go and try and get some time in over the weekend, maybe stream it a little bit. I don't know, just to get a little like that. Looking at Diablo 2 through the lens of now everyone is critiquing Diablo 4, through kind of like that lens of D2. The D2 purists are out and they're like wanting to be like full force with I prefer this over Diablo 3 and all that stuff. And it's good to have critiques and different opinions, and I will be getting into that. But before I segue into the whole systems blog and stuff like that, okay, so there's this leak out there. Lore, yeah. So there's this leak out there that someone went through and found in the announcement cinematic by 3 They Come that the Pale Cultist has editor tags in the timeline that state that he is in fact Rathma, and I don't believe it. I'm going with one of Riker's theories on here that it might have been something like older, like that it was original script idea of him being Rathma, but then it didn't work for the character, and so they changed him. But then it was just like an older holdover, from an editor tag or whatever that they had done when splicing everything together, and that it just hadn't been changed or updated or something like that, because it doesn't fit the character. It does not. That can't be Rathma, and if it ends up that it actually is Rathma, because I won't believe it until Blizzard says specifically like who the character is, because if it is Rathma, that is just like a complete bastardization of the character. We're just gonna pick a name from lore and slap it on this random guy, because nothing in the character is Rathma. He hates Lilith. He hates Inarius. And there's people going through, oh, it's about the balance. We've been working with Heaven too much. No, there was a whole book about this. Moon of the Spider is entirely about the flawed concept of the balance where, oh, if you fight against Hell too much, eventually you gotta fight with Hell to maintain the balance. That's not how the balance works. The balance is keeping both angels and demons out of Sanctuary, period. It's not about going through and, well, we've had a little bit too much angelic influence, so we've got to invite Hell in. The only reason why the necromancers and such worked with the angels or Heaven, period, was because, they would come in, help fight against Hell, and then they'd saw it off and not, come back in and try to interfere with anything, involving the humans or the Nephilim. That is what the balance was. That's the only reason why they ever joined up, with Tyrael or anything of that nature, was because they knew that they would respect the balance and stay out of the affairs of Sanctuary. So Rathma going through and inviting Lilith, the person he helped banish, that he led the rebellion against, makes no sense at all. And the only reason why they do it is because, Lilith is his mother, and they wanted to put that line in there. But there is no correlation between the person that we see in that video and who Rathma actually is. That just, it makes no sense. So I'm sticking to that one little theory, that Riker went in through out there, that it's some sort of holdover, that it's an old editor's note, and they realized that, oh, this does not work for who Rathma is, so we're just gonna change it to Random Cultist number 5. Because it does not fit. It does not work. And if it is actually Rathma, I will be extremely disappointed. They have to do a lot, and everything that would involve bringing him to that point is essentially massive retcons that undermine everything, so there, I've said my piece. I'm done.
Yeah, and no, I agree. And even with my very limited understanding of lore characters, Rathma probably one I don't know a whole bunch about, But again, the whole concept of balance, it's like balance is independent of the heaven and hell, and
Yeah,
how and it doesn't make sense. It's like heaven closed its gates.
yeah. That's like the, because that is
They're,
specifically like I
they're
was
just
saying.
not there
Yeah,
anymore. So so inviting more entities, higher power entities of hell into sanctuary does
if
not make sense as
if
far as balance.
as far as like the necromancers would be concerned at this point in time, with hell basically defeated and heaven having its doors shut, is the best for the balance has like ever been, in that respect. And it's just having to help rebuild humanity and kind of reform some civilization. Things have been thrown off whack, but they can focus just on our own internal issues without also having to focus on our internal issues and fight off heaven and hell. Because that was like I was saying earlier, like in the Moon of the Spider, one of the necromancers, who has like this, is one of the most accomplished necromancers like in history, next to the Colin or Mendelin, the original, the first necromancer, who was the student of Rathma himself. He had this special technique where he would actually like sacrifice like a part of his soul to destroy the soul of the person that he was attacking, but then a little bit of the soul of the evil entity merged with his own. So over time he became crazy. And so he saw a twisted view of the balance and figured, well, we fought against hell way too much. We actually have to summon a little bit of hell and demons into the world to counterbalance and maintain the balance. But then the rest of the necromancers were like, nah, fuck, dude, you crazy, we gotta kill you, and that was that was
It's like,
that was
it's like,
your
oh, Bill,
protagonist.
you've been out in the battlefield too much.
Yeah.
Here, let Jesse take you for a nice old ride to the cemetery.
Yeah, and so he tries to resummon, I think it was Askarath, one of the lieutenants of Diablo, a giant spider, that got imprisoned inside an artifact, called the Moon of the Spider. That he tried to free him, like just a little bit, like try and open Pandora's box just a little bit and let a whole bunch of spider demons out to destroy Westmarch, and then seal it back up. But of course that wasn't going to happen. He was being played, by the demon. But they were able to go through and of course stop him, and everyone had a happy ending. Yay! Except for the thousands of people that died from the spider demons in Westmarch. They probably didn't have a fun time. But Diablo story. So it's specifically like it canon in lore that is not what the balance is about. The balance is, maintaining the integrity of Sanctuary, where Sanctuary is supposed to be free from the eternal conflict, and heaven and hell. Yeah, heaven and hell are just, they can't be here. They're not allowed here. Now, if angels decided to come in and try and invade and destroy stuff, in Sanctuary, like we see in Reaper of Souls, where the necromancers are, kind of dispatched in order to go and deal with that. Yeah, that is, the necromancers will then go through and fight against, heaven. But when heaven or hell are not involved whatsoever, they're not going to go out of their way and summon the daughter of one of the great evils into our world. That is for certain.
No, that's and the thing is, even just doing a little bit of research, it's like the Church of the Triune, the symbols on the symbol on the cloak. And I said this in a couple of streamers' chats, and Bloodshed, before as he was putting the video, like right after he did the video, in the lore Q&A panel, when Harrison Pink is going over the 5 regions, when he gets to Kyrgyzstan, he mentions the Church of the Triune and their involvement in bringing Lilith back.
Yeah, they specifically said that the person in the cinematic was a cultist of the Triune.
Yeah, it's like it was stated at BlizzCon in the panel, in the lore and world Q&A section, and people go like, "Oh, it's Rafa." Like, no, you can trust metadata tags, which is probably which it, what with what Riker said and with what you're holding on to hope on, it's probably exactly that.
I hope so, because I will be extremely disappointed if it ends up actually being Rathma.
Because they were probably underneath crunch time from the moment that cinematic was that idea was put forth to the very end to make sure it was perfect. Why the hell would you go back like, oh, we have to edit this metadata to make it accurate to everything we're putting in? No one besides us is going to see it. We know internally what it is. This is just another. This is like another form of like of data mining for the community that is just going to have to be dealt with.
Yeah.
It's like we're really reaching at this point, and nothing is guaranteed. So I would tend to believe that you're actually safe, that this isn't actually Rothma. It's been all but confirmed at the BlizzCon lore and Q&A panel, and if it is, you're right, it would take a severe amount of bastardization of the lore and the character, and probably other characters along with Rothma over this period of decades between the end of Reaper Souls and where we are now.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, the last time that we saw Rathma was actually like 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, but that's where I don't know. So that's what's like, I check out.
Yep. But anyways, moving on. Before we jump directly into Diablo 4, there's a couple things there from. Let me bring it up here real quick. We had on the forums some, actually we're getting a little bit of chatter on the forums, from Matthew Cinderquist, who is the lead game producer for Diablo 3, over on the classic games team, and he kind of went and chimed in for some people going through and commenting on some stuff, just along the lines of they're going through and talking about, oh hey, wouldn't it be cool, if they created like set specific leaderboards, and things of that nature. He's going through and addressing, it's like, hey, that'd be cool. There's also even like a little thread where they're going through and commenting, hey, the clickers in the PS4 version, you can, if you're playing on the PS4, you can actually get a greater rift that is, or just regular rift that has the clickers from The Last of Us. And he's, commenting on that, or the person was complaining that they're way overtuned, that they hit for like the same amount as Rift Guardians, and that, if time permits itself, sure, we'll go through and jump in there and see what we can do. As well as even going through, and now I'm trying to find it, but he has actually been extrememly active over the last couple of days. There we go.
I would even say week or two, because I remember when I started doing the Dev Hell 5, the Diablo 4 feedback video, I was basically backlogging blue posts from Brandy, and then all of a sudden, who's this guy I've never heard of or seen before? And you just see response, Brandy, response, Brandy, response. It's like, oh, this is cool.
Mm-hmm.
This is what communication looks like.
Yep.
This is what we used to have. This is great. This is great. This is
funny.
Nice.
It's funny you say that you've never seen or heard of him before. You had dinner with him.
Really?
Yes. He was at the Korean barbecue. He was like sitting at your table.
Oh! He was the one at the end on the left side.
I guess I wasn't at your table. I don't know, but he was sitting at your table.
No, because he was the only person I didn't know. Okay, but the thing is, you have to give me credit. This BlizzCon, there were new people in the Immortal team, new people on the D4 team in general.
Yep.
And D3 had moved, so there was actually like a decent amount of new developers in general. This was the first BlizzCon where it was hard to keep track of all developers on all the teams, because that whole multiple teams, multiple projects line, well, came to fruition.
Yep. But then it was just one other thing that he went through and was talking about was like turbo HUD and bots, where they're like
Oh yeah,
specifically
yeah,
like
yeah.
jumping in, to a conversation where people were discussing like, hey, is turbo HUD, a bannable offense? And that that they're talking about that they're specifically working on adding turbo HUD into the list of the anti-cheat programs and detection for it, as well as specifically as for bots, their time is coming, which of course to any legitimate Diablo 2 player, or not Diablo 2, Diablo player, Diablo 3, Diablo 2, maybe Diablo 1, I'm not sure if people really care about botting in that game anymore. But he the fact that they're still working on addressing bots in D3 is huge. I remember, I think it was
Hmm.
just last year, they did a massive update for the bot detection in Diablo 2, and it was for a good 6-7 months. Diablo 2 was bot free. That there was no more spam in the chat. There were no more bail runs, at the level that people might want to take part in. But
Hmm.
that is definitely a sacrifice I'm willing to take, just for the fact that there's like no bots and that everything is legitimate and we're all in the same playing field. So botting is
Yeah.
still a super huge concern for Diablo 3. Who knows what they're going to be baking directly into the client as far as Diablo 4 goes.
Yeah, hopefully, an engine that's anywhere between 11 and 14 years newer will suffice in helping them with bot and hacking controls.
Yeah, it's good to see that is still a point, because it's still an issue, even to this day. I mean, hell, it's still an issue to Diablo 2, and it's going to be celebrating its 20th anniversary in a couple months here.
Oh, it goes up so fast. One more year and it could drink.
All
Then we
right.
get then we have a drunk Diablo just murdering everybody, demons and angels and Nephilim alike. How cute.
Uh, Good times. Good times. But yeah, to the meat, the meat of the section, I guess we can go through and kind of jump into. There was a couple of weeks ago, back on the 19th, we had the first in a series of system design blogs written by David Kim, where they briefly touched on some of the key concerns of the community, itemization, in-game ancients, all this other types of stuff, where it was kind of just a quick redress of issues. Didn't really get too deep into discussions or anything along those lines, but it at least was nice to go through and see that they're acknowledging it. Just 2 weeks after BlizzCon, just a little over 2 weeks after BlizzCon, and they're already jumping into responding to criticisms and critiques that people have had of what they've seen so far. And obviously with the huge caveat that they continue to reiterate in all of these blog posts is that Diablo 4 is still very early in development, and so everything is subject to change. And this is even like in Diablo 3, they were kind of like open in their communication early on, but they held a lot of things very close to the chest. They didn't reveal a lot of in-depth mechanics or what their plans were. Like they didn't even really talk about legendaries and things of that nature, or the itemization system until we were almost at launch. As far as Diablo 3 went, it was always like, well, here's a new class, and then next year here's another new class, and the next year, oh, here's a new class and some PvP. And so it was just a lot of things that we're having discussions that we didn't have in Diablo 3 until like the year before release. And even then they weren't so much discussions, it was here's what we're doing. Whereas here they're specifically like, this is an idea. Like it's probably like if this system that we'll talk about here in a little bit, like the power, like if this is something that really just came about like from the critiques that came after BlizzCon, I don't even know if this would be playable yet, like in their internal builds, or if this is just like mock-ups that they're talking about. You know, so
I would think. Sorry to interrupt, but I think they're at the point in development where I say in my feedback at least once if not twice, it seems like they're at the point in development where a system can be birthed on Monday, it implemented into the game very rough on Wednesday, and then on Friday it's tested and then deemed worthy if they put more time into it, or they just kill it off and start again the next week. Seems like they're at that point of the development, and this seems to be one of those types of systems. 'Cause this kind of came out of left field as far as like purpose or like
Maybe.
concept. I think.
I think you're probably underselling how long it takes to go through and add a system. You know, especially to the depth of what they're wanting to try and do with this power system. It was probably a little bit too quick. I'm just going back to like just some of the stuff that like David Brevik talked about, like in the early development of like in Diablo 1 when there were like 10 people working on the game. You know, if they wanted to add a treasure chest in, it took, you know, a day to do it, and you have a treasure chest in the game. But then in Diablo 2, putting a treasure chest in the game like took 11 days. You know, because one person had to concept it, another person had to actually make the model for it, someone else had to go through and rig its animation, while another person was then going through and adding the coding, and another person was then going through and inserting it into the game engine itself. So I want to say, especially with with what we've seen so far of the Diablo 4 engine, that it probably is, I don't know. I think it takes a lot longer than just a couple weeks in order to go through and implement something like that.
Well, if we want to kind of go down the blog and tackle each section as it is, but the power set and the power affix, they're just specialty affixes on gear. There's no talent tree. There's no art assets. It's
but
just they're just specially
there
affixes.
is a talent tree to it. Because it requires the power to activate the affixes themselves. You're talking about something that didn't even exist in the game.
No. The power stat and the power affix are just specialty affixes on gear. There's no other visual art asset at all to it. There's nothing in there. They're just affixes on items.
I see what you're trying to say in dismissing my point, but I mean, yeah. I think you're missing what it is that I'm trying to say, but okay.
No. I agree with your point that one requires the other, but I'm saying at the end of the day, they're just affix lines.
It's two lines of code that you can throw in the game in a day. Gotcha.
No,
okay.
I'm not going that far.
Yeah. Oh, you give them a week. That's right.
No, I'm just saying they're at the point in the development where they can birth systems very easily, implement them relatively quickly in a rough form, and then test them on Friday. And they're in the quick point of development, and that's actually a good thing for the game, so they can test more ideas out, conceptualize them, and deem if they're worthy. I mean, you have to remember, challenge risks were a passion project done by one of the developers over the course of a weekend or two. And then
I believe that was actually it was done by one developer over months.
But wasn't the initial concept? I specifically remember over a weekend, like the concept, at least the idea,
the concept.
But that's where they are in this game.
Yeah, but not something playable in the game engine or even roughly. It's just the concept for it. You know,
we're getting hooked up on semantics. Let's move on.
Yep. But yeah. So they're basically adding in Diablo 2 main stat, or like Path of Exile main stat, to where instead of like having like in Diablo 2 you had the main stats had effects on your character. Strength increased physical non-spell damage, dex increased your armor, your hit rating, and your block or dodge chance. Or there was no dodge, just your block chance. Energy increased your mana, and vitality increased your stamina and your health. But gear had requirements to where you had to have X amount of strength or X amount of dexterity in order to go through and use those pieces. What they're doing now, or at least what an idea or a concept that they had, going forward because of the lot of the feedback that they've gotten from people that were fans of the system in Diablo 2 or that are fans of the system as it exists in Path of Exile, that they have this new power system where they have angelic, demonic, and ancestral power, which each does have its own individual effect. Angelic power increases, like the beneficial effects, so your healing, self buffs. Demonic power increases the duration of negative or offensive effects. I imagine when it says duration of negative effects like debuffs and damage over time, that means just on the monster, not on yourself, that you're not actually actively gearing as a detriment to your own character. That would be interesting, to say the least, if that is how it plays out, where you have to, in order to gain power, you make yourself weaker. And there's a post on Reddit that I want to talk about something like that, but that can come later. And then finally, ancestral power, which increases the chance of on hit effects, like increased proc chance. But the big thing that these systems are going to be is that they're now going to be tied directly into the items that you find. And so, in order to activate certain affixes on the gear, you have to have certain allocations of those stats, such as this, the Swift fur-lined boots that we can see here. It has your defense stat, it has some angelic power, some move speed, but then in order to activate the +1 rank of devastation, or to activate the cold resist, you have to have the demonic or angelic power to get that. Now, unlike in Diablo 2 or Path of Exile, where you just cannot equip the item, period, and so it's a whole 0 to 100, this one, it still at least allows you to equip the gear beforehand. You'll have that a little bit of angelic power or something like the move speed, where you'll be able to get some power from it, or such as we see like in the amulet here, where it gives you can just always get the increased critical strike damage. That to get the actual real meat of the effect, you have to have certain allocations of these stats, which it does look like you're going to be getting from the gear itself. So just like in D2, where you're like, oh well, if I equip this necklace that's like +15 to all attributes, it allows me to equip this shield, which then also has enough strength on it to allow me to equip this chest piece. And so you've got like this gear Tetris block that's going on, almost like kind of like a Jenga tower. Is keeping everything together to make sure that you can equip stuff. Which is definitely a huge throwback. But I know, Dred, you're kind of coming from a point where you didn't play Diablo 2. So this is kind of maybe a new concept to you. And I know from like the some things that you just posted over on BlizzPro recently that you got some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, by nature, I can have knee-jerky reactions, and like I say, I'm on Twitter or in more private conversations. I tend to keep myself back. But okay, since this is the first section, affixes in Diablo 4, I was originally kind of against this whole angelic, demonic, ancestral because it was just like a knee-jerk reaction. However, I use these words very carefully because I have, especially with the feedback I just did, I want to be very careful with the words I am saying and how I am presenting my arguments, because I feel people are interchanging words and they're not analyzing what those words actually mean. Like, I want meaningful choices. I want hard decision points. We want complexity and depth. I'm like, define what those words actually mean. Otherwise, you're kind of doing stuff based off of the finalist guidelines. So, the angelic, demonic, and ancestral power, with the passives to it, I will say I can get behind the idea. Do I necessarily like or love the idea right now? Not necessarily, but from the ever increasing mind space I put myself in, where it's like, okay, I see this as a new addition to the system. How can this functionally work with the other things they've given us so far? And I look at like, okay, at the BlizzCon, things that were plus talent increases or plus skill increases were just on there. They were just regular, you could say, standard affixes. Now they're kind of, I don't want to say they're gating it behind the new power system, because I don't want to indicate I'm negatively looking at it, but they're kind of saying you have to earn those now, which is fine, and that works. But the broader idea that I come back to is, what does it mean to be complex, and what does it mean to have depth? And to me, depth means that it all works within the system. It's, at the end of the day, it's one system, and you're just adding layers to it. But you're basically, there's no subsystem to it. A great example in Diablo 4 is endgame dungeons. The endgame dungeon keys can't be used anywhere else in the game. And you can't force it to, you couldn't like put it on another item and force it to use with world bosses. There's no interaction there. You can't force to interact with the world, because the world difficulty, as far as we know and as far as the developers know at BlizzCon, isn't even settled, but there's no way of interacting those two. Therefore, the endgame dungeon key is just another layer to endgame dungeons. So that's depth, 100% depth, because you're just really modifying the base system.
Okay.
When I look at these powers, I see 100% complexity and no depth. Because if you were to take either the power affix or the power stat, let's say you take the power stat, put it on a gem, and you socket the gem, the system still works. You have the affix on gear, you have the power stat on a gem, and you socket, which causes it to be active, and the system still works. Or vice versa. Or if you put the power affix, since all these affixes require a certain amount of power, if you were to take these affixes, put them in basically a talent tree, that the more of the stat power you get, it increases, and it would act the same way. And then if you have the power stat either on the gear or again on the gems, the system still works. So therefore, it's a subsystem of the item. It's not actually integrated into the item. It is 100% complexity. There's no depth. And a reason B why it is all complexity and no depth, for the most part, I don't want to ignore the fact that they are adding resistances and possibly other affixes tied to these demonic or angelic or ancestral powers. But it seems like the bulk of what you're going to be shooting for, at least in the two examples they gave us, are going to be talents and skill points. But those don't seem like they're truly evolving the skills. When you shoot fireball, you're still shooting fireball. It does more damage. Or when you're using, say, upheaval, it may have a longer stun timer on it. It may do more damage.
That's
but
not
it's not
necessarily
evolving the skill.
That's not necessarily true, because they did give examples at BlizzCon where you'll unlock additional effects of the skills itself at higher levels. That might not necessarily be for everything, but it's certain ones that I forget one of the examples that they gave, but I think it was like Fireball, where after like a certain number of ranks, like Fireball will add a dot, but only after you've given it a certain number of ranks, or like certain buffs and such. I think it was Warcry, where at a certain rank it's just going to give you the movement speed and the increased defense. But then once you get a certain skill rank, it will now also unlock. It gives you the immunity to status effects, that you can't be like stunned or slowed while the Warcry is active for a little tiny bit of the duration when it's initially applied. So the skill rank system will actually evolve the skills. That's something that they can easily tie into the items, to where, say that you can only put like 10 ranks in a skill. Well, there's additional affixes that you can unlock on those at rank 11 or 12, and so now you have to use gear to reach those points.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And I remember hearing about it, but it was like, how they were keywording PvP and trading and sets, but they had no example sets. They mentioned mythics, but they had one. It was unfortunately too much and it glanced over. But that's kind of where I'm going at, because now, and because unfortunately I get stuck in the minutia of things. That's just how I drill down to this. So I see that as being basically a lot more complexity. And when you look at the overall scheme of skills, talents, and the items that drop, as of right now, with what we know, we can basically respec talents at whim, depending on, well, and we don't know what the cost is, but that was what they
Yeah,
stated.
they stated that we won't be able to respec skill points, but we will be able to respec talents.
Yeah. So as you just stated, we won't be able to respec skill points. We there potentially will be main quest line and or side quest lines that we can get a skill point, and there will be skill tomes that we can get skill points, but without any real reference of over the course of a week how many could we spec on average, which again they probably don't even know. They probably barely have those things
I
implemented
I
in
don't
the
think
game.
that they've
I
even
give them,
gotten yeah, I don't think they've even gotten close. They're still they're still developing the skill tree system and the talent tree system itself.
yeah.
The
So
time to completion is probably a conversation they'll be having in like a year or two.
yeah. So, and the unfortunate problem of complexity versus depth, in my mind, in my opinion, is complexity is it it doesn't it usually doesn't shrink the possibility for further issues down the line. It only exasperates them, because when you look at a legendary, a Diablo 3, yes, there are primary and secondary affixes, but they're all standard. None of them are special cases. None of them, if you have this, it dictates 99% of the time that you can't have this one. Yes, there's all resist and secondary resist, but that's basically a one-off kind of situation. So you have all your standard affixes and you have your legendary power. So that's basically two groupings of affixes on a legendary item in Diablo 3. But now when you go to Diablo 4, you're going to have your standard pool of affixes, your power stat, your power affix, and the legendary power. So now there's four groupings of affixes that
Well,
don't always interact in the same way, that you're going to be fighting RNG, because
we
that you're
there
going to be
is
fighting to try to get something that's useful. And again, I understand they don't have the system built and we're all giving our feedback, and I'm not criticizing them harshly on this. I'm
well
just
the just
saying
the
that
one thing
it seems to be a lot harder not to get a perfect item, but a usable item, or more importantly an item. Like, I want to be a fire sorcerer, but if the game keeps on shoving frost stuff my way, then okay, I'm guess I'm going down that route. But if my skill point allocation is permanent and I put too many points into frost, and if the average attainability of skill points at the middle and late game isn't enough to recover those points to put them in the fire, to make sure that the balance between my frost skills and my fire skills can be bridged, then the game has basically dictated my gearing path at that point.
doesn't
I
that
mean,
happen in Diablo 3 now?
but at least and they can correct this in Diablo
I'm just
4.
saying, like in
No, no,
Diablo
no, no.
3, like just give me a second, because like in Diablo 3, if the set that you want to use does not drop, you have no choice. You can't play that build, period. Like if the way that they're saying that it's that the in game and their end effect that they talk about in this blog, that it's not just your items, but it's also your skill points and your talents that you're going to be using in combination over one another. If I don't have the items to go through and say buff the fire set that you want to play, and that you're only getting the frost items, you're still getting the skill points and the talent picks that you can in order to go through and support the fire. And so you now have 2/3 of the whole wheel that are supporting that spec in order to go through to fire, which leaves you, in my opinion, in a better place than what Diablo 3 is, where Diablo 3 is, it's, it's the whole, like I was mentioning before, it's 0 to 100. It's nothing until you have the items, and then you're full gunning, clearing GR80s and such. There's no gradual buildup in between. But with at least what we've seen in Diablo 4, because it's multiple overlapping systems that will all work together to give you that power, it lessens the effects that items have when you put it in comparison to Diablo 3. And that you now have that leg up, that if you I just want to be a fire mage, period, that you are better supported in continuing to be a fire mage, and eventually you will get those fire items to drop. And we don't even know, like, if enchanting or gambling or re-rolling or anything like that exists. And there's the other system for, like, the legendary replacement, which actually, in my opinion, would leg up you even further, because it allows you to better customize your gear.
Yes, but to answer your original question, right now we don't know the scope, the guiding principles, or anything like that about what they plan to do with crafting in Diablo 4 at all.
Yeah, I know. My main point is that, like, the items is just like one piece of your overall power, whereas opposed to like Diablo 3, where it's the entirety of your power. That now that you kind of addressing some other points that you've had previously, not on this particular show, but some concerns that you've had. Is that making, like, your skills and your talents matter, and that they matter a lot more of what we've seen in Diablo 4. We don't know for certain. But they really drive that home in the communications that they've been putting forward, that items is just one piece, and that they haven't even gotten to talking about how skills or talent trees are going to affect it all. But if we just go off what we see, it's kind of like items is just 1/3 of your complete package as far as giving you that power.
Yes, that's what they say, but it just appears differently. Because at least in Diablo 3, we had the Mystic, we had Ramalana's Cube, we had the Kanai's Cube too, which, when you really think about Kanai's Cube is a giant gear accelerator in many different ways.
Oh yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to course correct for bad gear itemization.
Yeah.
Or obtain, and a lot of stuff, and a lot of people don't realize this, a lot of stuff was done to the items themselves, like set chest piece, helms, and pants didn't always roll with a guaranteed sockets on them. That was something that was changed, and I think any set jewelry piece also rolls with a socket automatically. That's where my remembrance gets a little blurry on that matter, because that happened so long ago. But things were done to ease the gearing of not letting RNG have 100% control.
Yeah, but that was the necessity of how they built the game, because the entirety of gameplay is 100% reliant upon items, and so they had no choice in order to accelerate the item find, so that way you actually had the freedom to play different specs or different styles. If they hadn't included that, then you legit would probably just be playing your Hadrig's Gift, for God knows how long, until you actually even, or the fact that they even included Hadrig's Gift to get you off the ground in the first place. With what the game is played at now, like, just try playing the season without Hadrig's Gift, and waiting until you get that first set complete.
Or the CR.
Yeah. And so there's definitely, like, a lot of things, but if you're trying to like go through and like base the argument that, oh, D3 has these systems in order to make that easier, you can't then also say, because we don't know about Diablo 4, you can say, I would probably say it in the respect that we've got these things that will accelerate, build growth in Diablo 3. I hope that they do that in Diablo 4, depending on where they go through and go.
No, because my original example was you roll a level 1 character, you're leveling through, and the game is just giving you more forced items gear wise than anything else. But you want to build a fire source, because you just like those talents, you like the overall theme. That's the gear path you want to set out. but but the thing is, then you start putting the minimum amount of points into the skill tree just so you can hoard skill points. And remember, we don't know how many skill points we're going to have total. It could be geared towards, on average, we don't even know what the skill point max is.
No,
So
we
I
don't.
know
Yeah.
we're talking in a big hypothetical, but it's still a very valid conversation, because, and we also don't know how the allocation of skill points, because remember, the skills are the core of the class. The skills are the core theme of what a class is. So if I'm putting points into frost skills, and the talents can be respected at any point, but the thing is, talents only prop up the skills. You can put talents into fire, but if you don't have the fire skills, the talent is essentially dead. So that's not really a valid choice until you have those said fire skills.
But my question is, if you want to play a fire mage, why are you putting the points into frost?
Because the gear is the ultimate dictator.
But
There's no,
that's making the assumption that the gear is the ultimate dictator, when what they've
but
said,
it is.
no, they've said that gear is only one piece, and that the skills in the talent trees in combination with the gear is what will be there. You're just making an assumption based on what you've seen, I imagine, from Diablo 3. But they spent
No,
time in this
I'm
article.
looking purely going off of what they've stated and what they showed. I'm looking at this as a pure system example. Where do skills in Diablo 4 have skill runes?
I mean,
There are none.
I'm just gonna go through and swap back over here to the browser scene, because it's something that is important that I think you might have missed. It's important to reiterate here that items are just one part of the character's overall power. Our goal is to spread out power across different sources, including skill ranks, your character's level, talent trees, items, and an in-game character progression system, which, like everything else, is still in development. So items are not the end-all be-all in terms of your character's power. I'm going from the point of view that, from what they're going through and saying, like in your example, if you don't have or if you don't have fire items dropping, that you are still a considerable leg up with wanting to go through and play your fire mage by just putting your skills and your talent points into fire spec, and eventually those fire items will drop.
But the problem with that is how's the game gonna be balanced? Is it gonna be balanced difficulty-wise? Difficulty-wise, and the player's ability to handle the difficult, because we don't know if it's gonna be a torment-like system, or if it's gonna be a dynamic system that we'll be able to interact with, or if it's gonna be something purely based on our level. We don't know. They don't know. At least at BlizzCon, they had no idea. They were looking for suggestions. So yes, if I pick fire skills and I put points into them, and then I take the talents, but if the items aren't dropping, yes, items would eventually drop, but it's hard to see that if a lot of frost or lightning items are dropping, or especially legendaries, which are going to be a lot rarer, and by them being a lot rarer, the way they roll is going to hurt a lot more if they don't roll as well. So you're just basically get to a point. I feel we're almost get to the point where we almost don't really mind as much how they roll. I think we're gonna have to get out of that D3 mentality where we need the perfect roll on every affix, which is a good thing. It means we can just play the game to play the game.
Thankfully, yeah.
But at the same time, if I then pick fire because I want to play it, hell or high water, and I put the talents in, the end all be all are the items, because that's the last avenue of customization I have, and that's 100% RNG dictated. And until we know the scope of crafting, even in a guiding principle way, we over the course of a season, like when you were playing maybe only an hour or two a week, or when I had Robin and I was lucky if I could play 2 hours on a Friday, it could be a pretty sucky experience to go through a season and be like, okay, so the game just basically dictated my gearing path. Now, I'm not saying that's the way it is in Diablo 4. Again, we're like, it seems like every 5 minutes we have to put this disclaimer in, but it just reinforces we understand. But I think the sheer complexity that this power system is by just being always on gear. I feel I can get behind it, but I feel if anything, maybe decouple the power stat, put it on gems, let gems have some value, and it would be a little bit easier to a little bit easier to set your own gear path. And by doing, and you're not taking any complexity out, you're actually giving depth to a new gem system. And I feel the ease of determining what piece of gear is better to pick would also be alleviated. And that would make it easier that if I want to be a fire sorceress and I'm just not seeing a lot of fire sorceress gear drop, I can at least take advantage of the power stat system because it's separated out whether I want demonic or I want angelic or that. So I think that would be a little fine-tuned adjustment. It's just I see a lot of the end game enhancement stuff being lopped onto items, and this power stat and this power affix being an example of that because it's on gear at the moment. There's no spreading out of the love.
Well, that's the thing, we don't know. They actually they haven't even stated. They gave one example, of an item that has angelic gear on it, but nowhere do they actually state if that is the only source of actually getting power, because they list it as a stat, not an affix. For the power itself, because that could be one of those ones that easily could be. You go through and you look at, say, like the Path of Exiles, their talent tree system, where you can talent into just main stat. Like it can limit some of your choices and such, as far as what you want to accomplish for certain particular builds or passive effects and such. But I've got this item that I really want to use because it's got some powerful stuff on it. Well, I'm gonna go through. I'm gonna divert into this this section of the talent tree just to get plus 20 of this particular main stat so I can equip this piece of gear. That could be something that they add into the talent system or even the skill point. I think it was we were going through and having a conversation that SVR was a part of, and just going through, well, what if since, like, say Blizzard, I believe is the example that we were giving, is kind of a area of effect dot. What if every X number of ranks that you put into Blizzard as far as skill points goes, that it gave you more demonic power that increased the power of Blizzard. And so that way it would also make gearing towards Blizzard easier, because it will unlock those stats that would affect it if Blizzard is all geared towards the demonic stat. Like anything that would have plus skill ranks to Blizzard or plus talent ranks that affected Blizzard would all be demonic. And so it gave you a very clear gearing path, as well as helping you, the player. And the thing that I like about the system is that the effects of the power themselves directly tie in to the affixes that they're unlocking, and that will teach you basically how to play the game. You want to be more defensive? Well, then you want to stat angelic, and you will learn that by looking at, oh man, all of these resistances or these armor buffs or whatever are all unlocked by having angelic power. So if I want to survive, I should spec angelic, and that kind of guides you, in your gearing path.
Yeah, but now that you brought that up, that concept, that learning the game, but specifically angelic being defensive and everything. Now I haven't played. Now I don't play hardcore, but if you look at the two examples they gave, and again, usual disclaimer: early in development, subject to change. Do you think a hardcore player looking at the power system, and you look at the standard affixes versus the power stat affected ones, and when you see critical hit damage, that 15% I think it is a basic stat.
Yeah.
But the 25% fire resist is a power based, is a power affix based on a power stat. As a hardcore player, where usually the gearing is more, it's not solely defensive, but it's usually it's up until maybe I don't know what season it would have been, where basically hardcore players geared the same exact way as softcore players. Um, but before then, it was usually like old diamonds to get all resist, just to give you any form of defensive buff. Do you think hardcore players are with what we see in these two examples, and just kind of extrapolating it just a little bit? Do you think hardcore players should feel a little bit maybe slighted that they may have to, if they want to get benefits from, say, demonic, but they need the all like at least a fire or cold and a physical resist, they basically have to go a dual power stat system versus someone on softcore? It's like, okay, I can live without this fire resist, and there may be other things with angelic that may make it tantalizing. I'm willing to bet there is. But if you want to go straight damage on softcore because you don't care if you really die and there's no real death penalty that we know of yet, that the critical hit chance doesn't require power set, that there may be a little slight inequity between some of the offensive versus defensive affixes that they have. Do you feel that at all? Do you get that at all, or is it something? And I'm not
No,
trying to I'm not trying to corner you into
and
some. I'm just
no,
asking
I
from your
yeah,
perspective.
absolutely not, because we do it already. A hardcore player is going to value vitality or all resist in Diablo 3 as it is a lot more than a softcore player. Where a softcore player will gladly go through and roll off vitality of one of the first stats on their gear as they're progressing up further. A hardcore player doesn't. They value that vitality a lot more already. Just in the same way, that if we extrapolate it out to the Diablo 4 power system of what we've seen, that if I have to stack angelic a lot more than demonic in order to get, those survivability boosts, as a hardcore player, I am going to stack a whole lot more angelic than I do demonic to go through and get those. And then it becomes a interesting system for the hardcore player of how do I gear myself, because that's something that also exists even in I can't speak to Path of Exile as much because I don't play the game. I don't understand it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that plays into their gearing aspects as well. That when they go through and have to get certain main stat allocations to equip different pieces of gear while also keeping their survivability in check. But in Diablo 2, every point that I had to put into strength or dexterity instead of vitality was a very painful decision. Whereas a softcore player could easily go through and start, well, I'm just going to put a whole bunch of points into strength so that way I can equip, better weapons, or I want to use scythes, so I'm going to go with a whole bunch of dex as well. Those are gearing decisions that the softcore player is, whereas the hardcore player is like, well, I'm going to put in like a bare minimum amount of strength because I need a lot of vitality, and that's going to mean that my early gearing decisions, I can't use the heavy armor, so I want to try and get, like shark skin, items first once I get into Nightmare, because they have lower strength requirements, and so that means I can go through and do these things, or I'm going to make sure that I put 2 points, into dexterity every level so I can keep my block chance max at 75. There's a lot of things that already are going on where the hardcore player, as by nature of being a hardcore player, you are already making the concession to gear defensively and not completely offensively than a softcore player does. So that question is kind of something the hardcore players is already thinking about. It's not even a question, so much. They're already thinking about, well, man, I'm gonna go through and like, well, what is actually unlocked to angelic? I don't have to worry about those things. What is the minimum amount, of what's the minimum amount of demonic power that I can get away with? That's assuming that like everything defensive is tied to angelic. But it's going to be one of those questions for the hardcore: is what is the minimum amount that I can get by with in order to go through and equip these affixes to get this particular build or this talent or something like that done. Mm-hmm. Whereas I stack everything else in whatever accounts for defensive things.
Yeah. Okay. No, because that's why I wanted to pose the question, because it's going to innately make gearing more difficult. I'm not gonna make an assumption that it's gonna make difficult and like 10 times harder. Like, no.
I mean, that
But
is, but that is
but
kind of the purpose of the system in the first place. Is that this is one of those things that people, not just players of Diablo 2, but players of Path of Exile and other, ARPGs that if you've never played anything outside of Diablo 3, you've never really had the experience with, is that having to make sacrifices and concessions, with things that you might not necessarily want to be statting, or pieces of gear you might not necessarily want to use in order to use the ones that you do. And that is part of, that system of it's a lot harder to have everything, and in some instances you can't have everything, and you have to make difficult decisions where, well, do I want, in order to stack enough strength to equip this piece of armor that allows my fireball, in order to trigger twice, which means that I won't have enough energy or intelligence to equip this particular staff, which makes it so that way my fireball leaves a dot. And now I have to make the decision, well, am I going to stack int or am I going to stack strength? Which direction do I want to go with my build? Because I can't do both. And that's kind of like where those decisions come down to, and what fans of a lot of other ARPGs want, like that level, of complexity, where it's not always just, I'm going to equip my set, I'm going to put my bracers, my belt, and my rings on, and then that's it, I'm done. It's specifically going down the line of, well, I got these nice bracers. It doesn't really have an affix that I can use, but man, it's got a ton of both angelic and ancestral, and makes all of my gearing decisions easier. So yeah, I'll give up the affix on my bracer slot just so that way I don't have to worry, in order to equip this helm and this chest that I want.
Okay, no, that's completely valid. But like I said, I just want to get your perspective, especially because, well, played hardcore like a lot more than I have, in that regards. It's almost, and this is kind of like, it's on the same topic of the powers, but it's a totally completely different question. It's more just speculative.
Yeah, and the one thing that I do want to go through and mention, that that it looks like they're going back to the Diablo 2 system, where you don't have resists as a ever increasing, what is it, where you get the diminishing returns on your resist, where you're always approaching 100% but never quite get there type thing. It looks like it's just flat out, because those items, again, it's just flat 25% cold resist, 25% fire resist, and because that was what D2 had, is that you capped at 75. You couldn't gear for more than 75% in those elemental resists. And you always wanted to go through and get that. Where when you went into higher difficulties, you started negative. So like in Hell, you started at negative 100 resist. So you actually had to equip 175 in your resistances to get to the cap. It looks like they're going somewhat similar in that route in D2, which is another one of those ones where it's like, it's not like in Diablo 3 where I always just want more, that I only want this much. Anything above this much is a waste. So now when I'm going through and putting all my gear together, it's like, well, I've got these two things right here, but it's putting me over cap on cold resist. So I'm going to keep going through and gambling or whatever, or trading for bracers that just don't have cold resist on them, that have something else, because I don't need any more cold resist.
It's kind of like, you could say, like, I say old-fashioned secondary monk before. I mean, it kind of works. The monk passive, take 40% of all your secondaries and redistribute. So your gearing choices, like, just have as many different high values of everything, because it all contributed to a bigger resist in it. But there's a natural limit that you can get from all the gear. I know it's not a direct correlation, but that's probably the closest thing I can think of at first glance. But the interesting question I have for you, and this is more of a purely speculative one, because there's been no indication one way or another, and this kind of rolls into the consumable that they stated. Now, because the old item progression at BlizzCon, and even saying old, it's like, oh, this was a month ago, barely. that they're going to have the consumable item that when it drops, you identify it. It's a legendary, essentially, it's a legendary power that you
Yes.
can then attach to a rare and a rare only, which essentially turns it into a build it yourself legendary at that point.
Yeah.
So the old item progression was rare to sets, which were going to be repurposed to be stepping stones
Yeah, because that was.
to legendaries,
Yeah, let me
and
see if I can
then
find it real quick, because that was one of those things that in the panel they said that legendaries and sets were at the same level, but then in another instance they said that sets were
it's
the
kind of hard to
introductory.
the way they showed it with like the streamlined arrow wasn't the right way. It should have been more like a staircase, like bar graph instead of a line graph type deal.
Well, it's one of those ones. It was just to show like how early they are in development, that a lot of those things just they haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
You know?
So just to finish it off, it was sets were stepping stones to legendaries. So I'm assuming sets were more generally utility based rather than filling the full fantasy archetype of a class, which is good in any regard. And then finally finishing off with mythics, because we know ancients is another thing discussion on the blog that are now no longer a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about it, if you can have a rare, and then you have a pretty decent rare, and then you get a legendary that you would replace that rare with. It's not the perfect legendary, but it's a decent enough FX. It's a decent enough legendary power. It's your standard role. Neither the rare nor legendary are perfect, but it's an upgrade in rarity. You get a legendary power. So you take that rare, you put it in your stash. You now have that legendary. You're playing through. You're upgrading your gear, and you get one of these consumables, and it's better than the legendary power. So you go back to your inventory, you take that rare, you put the consumable legendary power on it, and you replace the legendary. The first thing is what if anything should be done to legendaries to give them, not to make them stronger. I want to emphasize, not make them stronger, but maybe give them a little bit more of an advantage over the consumable. And the other question is do sets still have a purpose at that point? And overall theme. Those are the two questions I have.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that first point, and that's the question that they did not address in that blog, is where do actual legendaries set? Like this consumable item that allows you to add a legendary affix onto a rare piece of gear sounds interesting. Like it sounds like that could be like one of those things we talked about earlier, where it's a faster gearing progression, because now I don't have to wait for the legendary item to drop. I could also get the consumable to drop and then throw it on a good rare, and then I still get the item. So it's like one of those ones where it increases my odds of getting these items, that I'm specifically, gunning for, or it's a great, like, this is like straight up SOJs in terms of if it is a tradable item, that you could have an economy based on these, where you're going through and trying to trade specific, skill affixes or legendary affixes, for different items and such. That kind of gives like a baseline value. But do rares roll higher affixes than legendaries innately, or do legendaries roll higher affixes than rares innately? Because if they roll the same level, if I'm always going to get 25 resist or 30 demonic power, whether it's a rare or a legendary, it kind of detracts from the value of the legendary, because now they're just rares with an affix, and I can eventually get an affix to throw on a rare. But if legendaries are better than rares, it reduces the effectiveness of the consumable, unless it brings the rare up to the legendary level, which then makes the legendaries again less useful. Or does this consumable item then innately make the item higher than a legendary? And so that way I could find a legendary, it'd be great, but I want to find the consumable in a well-statted rare, so that way I can make it better. And so that's a whole bunch of the questions of like, where is the power level that this system relies? Because it talks about as an ancient legendary replacement, which was above what ancients themselves, or was above what legendaries were, but they decided
Hmm.
to scrap the ancient system. I'm getting my terms confused here. They decided to scrap the ancient legendary system completely, and this is kind of like the thing that they're thinking about. They didn't even have a mock-up presentation to show, so I'm sure that this is like probably one of those things that like hit the drawing board like a couple days before, like when they were writing the blog.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it is, I have trouble figuring out where it should lie. If this is what's going to replace ancients, then it probably should bring the item up so that way it's better, than a legendary. And so that the goal is that the legendaries are filler, and that but then you have the inventory nightmare. I've got to hold on to like the best rare in every slot because I need to get that consumable to go through and upgrade it. It's like I just need to know more. I have to say that at the moment I'm not terribly a fan, of this particular thing because we've talked about this. I don't see the point of why rares need to be useful. I don't know
I'm with
yeah.
you on that camp. But if I could just give an example and get your opinion, and we're friends, you could tell me if your real opinion. Because I was talking in Discord with Knight and Shep yesterday, and I brought this up. And Knight made the suggestion, well, what if and this is one of two. This is his suggestion, and you actually know mine already. What if he suggested, well, what if the consumable version of the legendary power was slightly weaker than what it would have been on a legendary? So like 75% power. So if there's a legendary affix that would let you get 200% damage of a skill, the consumable version would max out at 150.
I mean, then it's just a gearing stopgap, and then it doesn't actually make rares useful because the idea is just what rares, what the purpose that they would serve is that you gear with them because they've said specifically let me take a step back. They've said in Diablo 4 that like legendaries and those types of items, those powerful items, are not gonna like rain like candy like it does in Diablo 3. That when you find those,
Yeah, I agree
yeah,
with that.
that when you find those legendary items, that should always be like a wow moment. That should be an awesome moment. When you're doing the more difficult, higher levels of in-game content, it does not increase the drop rate of these powerful items. It just increases the power of the ones that do. Maybe it unlocks certain ones, like kind of like an item level scale, like what early Diablo 3 or what Diablo 2 uses. With that in mind, what that system would do is just make a stopgap until I find the legendary, and ultimately it extends the life of a rare, but not really, because a rare is what you would be using until you find the legendary to replace it. If I find the consumable, and if the consumable is tied specifically also to in-game content, then what is it? I farm up rares, start the in-game dungeons, I farm up the consumables, farm higher level in-game dungeons, so that way I get the legendaries to then now farm mythics. It adds another step in the ladder without actually addressing the complaint that people had of wanting to make rares useful. So the only way that I see it being is if it actually makes it above legendaries, so like make legendaries maybe a little bit more common, but it's this consumable plus a rare that you're now hunting two pieces of gear in order to take you to the next level, which has its own set of issues, and I'm not advocating for that at all. But I don't understand where this fits, as opposed to say, a conversation that we had at BlizzCon. Just because they said ancient, legendary, doesn't mean that it's an ancient in terms of Diablo 3. Like, we don't even know what an ancient meant for Diablo 4, and they've gutted it. It's been removed.
They never showed an
Yeah.
example. It's like one of those mystery systems that, like I said, that it's like they birthed it. They
Yeah.
like I don't. And the thing is, and you know this, since my feedback video came out yesterday, the day before that, I was right in my logic. Because I said ancients, I said it to the effect of I could see why it was hard for them to figure out a purpose for ancients because ancients were not part of the core system in Diablo 3. It was a band-aid fix to extend the loot hunt, and it's hard to take a band-aid fix and make it part of the core game if the only thing it did was extend the loot hunt, if there was no defined purpose for it other than that.
Yeah.
So
But
I'm happy I got a win. I'm happy I got a
Though I mean, in terms of Diablo 4, it's a different game. Just because it has the same that shares the name, that it doesn't, that doesn't mean that it has to have the same effect. Like, because like the idea that I had when we were talking at BlizzCon was, what if an ancient legendary just rolled with a second random affix, and so you're now that becomes what the rare hunt in Diablo 2 was finding that rare item that had all of the right affixes on it, because you're dealing with so many levels of stats that, if you're hunting for, a sorceress, hunting for the perfect wand is looking for +3 sorceress skills, +3 fire skills, +3 meteor, on a wand. Never gonna find it. That's like a godly find, and that could be what mythics, could be. It's a step between, because mythics roll with 4 affixes, that it seems that they're somewhat random but somewhat set, from the comments that they've made, because they said that at one point they said that they're kind of like a random collection, but other ones they said certain mythics will only drop during certain seasons, so there is at least some idea they have there that there'll be fixed sets, for these mythics. But an ancient could just be, well, if I find an ancient bracer, there's a legendary bracer that increases my blizzard damage, and it could randomly roll an affix that also increases its duration, or I want the one that increases its area of effect, but it rolled with the affix that increases its duration. I gotta keep trying to find this bracer until I find the one that has the 2 affixes that I had. Or with this system that they've done, what if the consumable item added the affix to a pre-existing legendary, so you could have legendary with multiple affixes? That's at least, something that I felt that was at least more interesting in terms of character progression. Obviously, it doesn't address the issue that people are having with making rares useful. But then again, I'm from the mindset where I don't necessarily need rares to be useful. What is it that a rare can do that a legendary can't, or that a legendary shouldn't be able to do? I guess it should be the question. That's just my thinking. It's just another step of gear. And I know there have been examples where people are going through and it's like, oh well, in like D2, like blue gloves are the only ones that could roll like +3 to martial arts skill. Rares could only roll +2 if I really wanted it. Yeah, but rares are going to roll with a hell of a lot more stats that will trump the usefulness of that extra +1 stat.
In totality, will always be better.
Pretty much. In almost any situation, the only time that you'll be using that blue is to just unlock like a tier for like a breakpoint until you can find that skill point to allocate on another piece of gear or a charm to then pass the breakpoint. You don't have to worry about it anymore. I can use gloves that have +2 instead of +3. That is the way that the Diablo 2 system actually worked. The blues were never like something that you really used into in game. I guess maybe in early Diablo 2, because you were looking for like cruel 2-handed swords, because cruel could only roll on blue items. They couldn't roll on yellows, so blue weapons could actually roll higher damage than what a yellow ever could. But then dang it, Lord of Destruction came out. I forgot the name of the expansion. You all can fire me now. Lord of Destruction came out, and then rune words and other uniques and stuff like that. And then farming cruel seemed no longer was a thing. You didn't need it anymore.
Yeah. Well, let me propose the second idea, but you know this one already. If the consumable was the static legendary power, and you have fixed it to the rare, so now you basically have the legendary that would have that legendary power. You basically have a build a legendary rare plus power that equals that. But what if the legendary item, if it's a skill based legendary power, you could replace the skill with another skill of likeness that the development team would determine. That idea I put forward to advance the concept of what it means to even be a legendary, because at that point you're not giving more power to the legendary, so you're not saying, okay, well, legendary is always gonna, it's not gonna outclass the rare that has the legendary augment on it, but you're giving flexibility within the actual legendary power. So that Staff of Fractured Flame, I could change the skill to Frostbolt, and now new gameplay options are open, but it's not power, it's just gameplay options.
Uh, I really don't see how that differentiates from what they've put forward. So, because basically now, instead of using that affix to change a rare into a legendary, you're just changing the legendary, which is ultimately the same. You end up at the same place. It doesn't really add anything that's too much different.
Not even if the rare is locked always in the fireball, but you want to get the staff, so you know you can change the skill to Frostbolt, and now you can have 3 Frostbolts, and that may open new avenues of gameplay for your
That
sorcerers.
that assumes that there's not a staff that doesn't already have the the +3 frostbolts.
Well, I would hope they don't do that, because then it's just item pool pollution at that point. Just to replicate items that do the same thing and basically be clever, not basically like be work smarter, not harder mentality.
Yeah, but I mean, from that perspective, then what is the difference? If you have 2 items that drop that have the same thing versus 1 item that drops, and then the consumable that changes it into the other item. It was just like, for me, from a design standpoint, you end up at the same exact position, one way or the other.
Well, the consumable one, you wouldn't be able to alter the skill. That would be something reserved for just the legendary. So legendary would just have more options to it, but it just wouldn't be power. It wouldn't be item power. It would just be the ability to change the legendary power, again, for just skill based legendary powers. I mean, it's opening its gameplay, opening up more item avenues of gameplay. So
yeah, I know, but I'm putting it forward where what does that address that just having another item that does the same thing?
Well, it would actually let the development team keep legendaries unique. Like, they wouldn't have to make those legendary items. Like, they wouldn't have to make a staff with Frostbolt and a staff with Lightning Spear. They would have the uniqueness and the lore-based element of.
So you're just basically saying it's like this is a staff that splits sorceress skills more so, and then that you have the consumable so to customize it to which skill you want it to affect.
The consumable, I guess, just to be perfectly clear, the consumable version of the Staff of Fractured Flame legendary would read splits fireball into 3 projectiles that does X percentage of fireball. But the consumable version you cannot change. It is locked into fireball and fireball only. But the actual legendary Staff of the Fractured Flame, the fireball skill would be a interchangeable through crafting to, say, Frostbolt or Lightning Spear, or whatever the developers feels fits the theme of the legendary. And there may be items where you can't. That's actually that would be part of the discovery of, okay, this legendary is good for this because I got a consumable that I've been using, but what else can I do with this legendary? So you go to a crafter and be like, my god, I could do meteor, so I can have the Staff of Fractured affect meteor. So now I have 3 meteors coming down, and now your gameplay options happen. But it's only valid with the actual legendary. You can't do it with the consumable.
I understand what you're saying. It's basically because the consumable just allows you to transmute what skill that the staff itself is affecting. So it kind of like is what the original idea of like the Diablo 3 like rune system was, You know,
Oh god, that pains me when you say that, because that
but
was so
it's
awesome of
well,
a system.
yeah, but it's inverted. So now instead of the rune that you would socket into the skill having the changing the effect of the skill, like the skill itself, is you have X item that will that the effect is splits a sorceress skill. And by default, the item will always drop a fireball, but you can get a consumable, like you said, that will change it to where it affects frostbolt, or meteor, or lightning lance, or something like that. But the core effect of it is that it will split the skill. It can do more damage when well placed, but also it affects it so that way it hits more, like more of the screen or something like that, where it like reduces the damage of the meteor, but it strikes like the entire screen instead of just the smallest portion, something along those lines.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
I mean, it would give, like I said, it would
Mm-hmm.
make it would make that when the consumable that places the legendary power on a rare is equal to the version of that legendary power that's on a legendary, but the legendary still has the one up in gameplay options, but just not adding power, because then as you went through, it's a Jacob's ladder of rares are weaker than the legendary, then you get the consumable, then the rare is, and then how do you make sure rare legendaries, like what, you just skip the legendary point and just hope for a mythic? It's very wiggly wobbly, and we're both on the same page, probably for the first time during the podcast, on why do rares, I don't get why rares need to be, um I guess people feel the need to make rares in some way useful for longer, because, and this is kind of tangenting, I'm sorry, but I think all the cumulative bad or lack of willingness, and dev time is precious and they only do so much, and what they focus on was the best they could do, and I will never say they were wrong for doing what they did with Diablo 3, with Reaper of Souls, to make it the best game that it is today. But the not being able to go back further to, when was the last time they did a skill revamp, a heavy duty skill revamp? It's been years. I would say at least 4 years, where you could
Um,
probably point to a patch where there was heavy skill, and
yeah, because
and that may,
at a certain point they were just doing skill revisions through items.
yeah, I mean, and if I remember correctly, the last two big skill revisions they did, the last one was Health Globe Nurse because of Necromancer, which, good, that did a whole bunch of good when you think about it.
It was Health
And the
Globe nerfs because of witch doctors.
well, potentially, well, if Witch Doctor, but they didn't carry it really forward enough with the Necromancer to stop rat runs, so to speak.
Well,
Uh,
that was well before runs were ever a thing. They nerfed the Health Globe generation for like witch doctors to kind of combat that playstyle, and then like a year later we got the Necromancer, and they just brought the playstyle back,
yeah,
and
it was
they never addressed
inconsistent.
and they never
It
addressed
was
it
inconsistent
afterwards.
implementation,
Yeah.
and then, but again, poor Witch Doctors, they got nailed hit hard with the only last two skill revisions, because the one before that was the big CC nerf across the board, which again affected Witch Doctors because they just kept everything on lockdown, and then the other three people in the group just burnt it. So those were the last. So everything got defaulted to balancing everything on items. So that's what I think. That's the reason why people despise legendary so much, despise sets so much, because we've been living with this playstyle for years. There's been no big iteration changes, and I think a lot of people just kind of look back towards D2. It's like, oh man, rares were so useful, and rose tinted glasses in
It,
some respects, and they're just
it's
going like, we want that playstyle. We don't want legendaries to be the end all be all. We don't want sets to be the end all be all. And I get it, and I agree with it, but I don't want the pendulum to swing so far back that it's like, am I going to be expected to be running around with primarily just roided out rares with the legendary powers on them? Is like, does that get who's gonna get excited? Like, oh my god, I have a whole bunch of rares with powers on them.
Yeah,
Like,
it's one of those ones where like it kind of worked in Diablo 2 because you pretty much were you couldn't have like or at least I don't want to say that you couldn't like most builds didn't care if you were fully equipped with uniques. Like there were uniques couldn't fill um every uh gearing choice that you needed in terms of getting all the attributes to even equip the uniques, or getting yourself all the all reses, or in many instances where just having like most uniques couldn't have more than one socket. Well, I want to go through and do MF runs, and so I just want a 6-socketed shield, or something along those lines that I could just throw a whole bunch of in, and there's a whole bunch of different aspects of the gearing as opposed to just doing the highest GR that you can. That you also needed, that you had to make concessions in your gear, that it didn't make sense to fully equip yourself with uniques, and that's where rares came in. But in that same respect, where you're looking for an amulet that has plus all res, plus all attributes, and +2 to class skills, is just the same as hunting for a flavor of time. It's just that you have a very specific use of why you want to go through and use that particular amulet, versus say running an angelic amulet and then 2 angelic rings because I need a lot of attack rating. It's kind of the same purpose, and I think it's people are just getting really hung up on item color, and they don't want to accept the fact that you could have a legendary of the same caliber in that gear slot, and like then why does the rare have to be useful? Like I like the way that they're doing with power and making the power the driver of your gearing decisions, where you have to make concessions between certain stuff. But like with the system that they have as far as making rares useful, it's just another tier of gear. It's legendary with a different name. And so like what's the point? I guess the one thing is that I'm just remembering now that came up in that conversation that we were having earlier is what if this consumable item allowed you to put a legendary affix on a different gear slot? So what if there's a legendary that only legendary bracers, and that's the only source to get this cool effect on Meteor or on Upheaval or something like that, was on that bracer. But there's another bracer for the same build that I want to use that buffs my Wrath of the Berserker, so that way I have a better survivability cooldown. The consumable could say add that affix to a pair of boots that I don't care. No, there's no legendary item in the game that exists on boots that I care about the affix for the build that I'm going on. Boots are a completely free item slot, so I don't care if I wear a legendary, or a rare. But that consumable item allows me to take a useful affix from a different item slot and put it onto an item slot that I don't necessarily care about. That was one instance, where I found that at that point, if there's a lot of power that comes from that legendary affix, and that's something again in the system blog that they addressed. Now we've been talking about these specific things that we didn't address some of the more broader topics, is that they don't want the legendary affix on items to be the only reason why you're equipping it. That they're adding more affixes on the gear, so that way the individual items themselves have a higher level of power. And that the legendary affix just kind of takes it up another notch, and that it's not the ultimate deciding factor on it or not.
They stated that they're adding more affix.
They're adding.
I guess you would say slots.
Yeah, they're adding more affix slots
to
across
magic,
the board.
rare, and legendaries.
And that they don't want the legendary affix to overshadow the rest of the affixes on the gear.
But if I remember correctly, the legendary no. Let me not spread misinformation. But if I remember correctly, the power stat and the power affix are only on magic, rare, and legendaries. Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't remember seeing that at all.
I may be confusing what I just said. We are increasing the affixes on items. Okay, so that's the magic, rare, and legendary. Okay, so the angelic power, demonic power, and ancestral power can roll. It looks like on everything. Okay, because I was thinking that mythics and sets weren't getting that. I thought that was weird, but I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
no, I didn't. I was about to say I didn't remember reading that in the article at all.
Yeah.
But to kind of go back, allowing say to roll these affixes on different pieces of gear so you can spread certain things out, I think would make an interesting choice in a gearing decision. And then at that point, if those legendary affixes are well balanced, and so that way that will then take a rare can be less powerful than a legendary, but if the affix will make the difference between a useful rare and a not useful legendary, make the useful rare with a good affix better than a useful legendary with a bad affix, then that gives a purpose for rares. That gives a purpose for rares to exist, because then I can spread the affixes around to other gear slots that I wouldn't necessarily be able to have them on, and give
Yeah,
me more control about the specific ones that I want to have on my character.
and looking at the article, that seems to be the way they're going, because they didn't add a tagline in saying that that the or, I
I
don't know
I'm
that the
just I
origination.
will more likely chalk that one up to the fact that have like, this is a system that they haven't even fully comprehended yet, and we're seeing
Yeah,
we're seeing literally a first pass on this. And that
yeah.
was going back to some of my earlier points in the show, that this is the type of level of communication that we've never got before, where
No, never.
they're showing us first drafts. This could easily be scrapped and not even make it into the game. But the fact that they're willing to go through and show us this is pretty cool. That they're willing to include us in these early development conversations, so that way we can have some input, before they take it to kind of like that maybe implementation phase, and actually getting it into the game, and getting these things up and running to fully test it. That they're including us in kind of the design and planning steps.
Okay, now that you've said that, I think that's how I'll gear what will be probably very, very brief feedback on this consumable. Is that's how, because I was assuming that's how it was just going to be, because when I did my couple of read throughs through it, I just assumed like, okay, an easy example is like, I could take the legendary power of Nemesis bracers and put it on my freaking boots, and then I can get wraps of the Demon Hunter UE bracers. If I got a legendary of it, I still have Nemesis, and it's kind of acting like. And then rares have a purpose in that, even if they are somewhat, even if they're a little bit less in power or even equal. So what's the point of the rare versus the legendary? The legendary is tied to the slot, but the rare lets you move legendary powers around your character sheet.
And then it will make it so that way your in-game gear progression will look where you have your one mythic, a couple of rare pieces, and the rest are legendaries.
Yeah,
Because
and in a way, it kind of mimics Kanai's cube, the one weapon, the one gear, and the one ring slot.
very
In a
much so,
way,
yeah.
it kind of mimics that emphasis without needing the Kanai's cube. It kind of integrates it. So I hope they do it that way. I have to put feedback where they're like, please make sure if you're going to do it, at least works this way. So that's why rares have that.
So that the system itself at that point is just literally, I get to equip 2 legendary bracers, or I get to equip 2 legendary chest pieces, because I'm taking the legendary affix that normally would only be found on the chest and put it on boots, or gloves or bracers or what have you. If that is the actual intention, of the system, then that makes sense. That will make rares fit into the in-game itemization system and not be an actual replacement for the legendaries. Because if the legendary is still a rare rolls 5 attributes and a legendary rolls 6. So a well-rolled legendary will always trump a well-rolled rare just by the fact that it has more stats on it.
Yeah.
We'll make it so that way if I can get this legendary affix, if I get this legendary on the bracer, with the legendary itself, that's great. And then the other bracer, I'll put on my boots because I don't care about boots. And so that's I could see them doing that. That would be cool. Okay. Now I'm a bit more on board with this system.
Yeah. All right. The whole attack and defense thing. The last thing that is actually pretty mild and pretty like, okay.
Yeah, I never cared. It's like one of those ones where it's like it's for me not wanting like the main stat and vitality like in Diablo 3 and how it oversimplified certain gearing decisions. I can agree with that particular type of system to where if it didn't roll early, not at the point in the game that we're at now and with the end game progression, I understand, but with the majority of the game's lifespan, if it didn't roll your main stat, it was useless.
But there were also a lot, and this isn't actually countering your point. This is actually helping you, because when you take in actual gearing decisions with a vast majority of the builds, even today, it's like main stat and vitality, either one or both are rolled off. It's like necklaces they're both rolled off. Headpieces, usually the vit is rolled off for crit and a skill damage.
Well, I mean,
shoulders and gloves usually you try to get quad factors.
That's a slightly different conversation. It's the same core aspect, but slightly different from then addressing like attack and defense on the items. But to get back to my point is that it's like if it didn't have your main stat on the piece of gear, it was useless, and so you kind of regardless of what else rolled on it, you threw it in the trash. But in the Diablo 4 system, it's not taking up an affix slot. It just always rolls with defense or attack, and so it effectively isn't there. It's not something that is taking place of something more interesting. If all of your gloves, if all of level 40 gloves are going to roll with the same relative value of a attack or defense, then it becomes a moot point that you're not even factoring into your gearing decision. It just makes it so that way a level 40 glove is just innately more powerful than a level 20 glove. Though, with what they're going through and doing now is just their attack is only on weapons, defense is only on armor, and jewelry has neither.
Yeah. Which I think is at least a better. I think that's at least a better implementation, because it makes sense if you try to think of it in like actual real world, like a knight in armor with a sword. The armor has it does nothing for attack unless the knight's gonna headbutt somebody, but but the sword is the only source of actual attacking damage. The gear is there just for protection value. And any jewelry, well, that's not really going to do either one. That's where all your special stuff is coming from. I'm just wondering, like, from like a base felt like it seemed like it was already not going to be factored too much at BlizzCon, and now it seems to have been refined to a lesser extent, even more. So I'm wondering.
I'm gonna blow your mind and say that it doesn't even matter. Because none of these values mean anything without context. And the context could just be that, well, we took attack off of jewelry and gloves, and then we literally just took all of those values and put it onto the weapon. So now the weapon, that attack value, is doing quadruple duty compared to what it did beforehand. And then we just took the defense off of the jewelry and then factored what those values would have been back onto the rest of the armor. And so you're still at the same exact level as you were beforehand. It doesn't list it on those gears. And so you're still there. You're still at the same point.
It's the relativity of it all.
It's 100% visual. It's 100% to make people's feelings better. And it doesn't mean anything at all. But people seem to be extremely, they're ecstatic about like this change. Like, yeah, it's not on that gear anymore. And I don't know. That's just the way that I view it. It literally means nothing. All that it is a perception thing. But then there's a hugely upvoted like post on Reddit where they're going through, change the name of legendaries to uniques and then don't make it orange anymore. And it's like, yeah, okay. So there are people that it literally like these extremely subjective and arbitrary things apparently matter a lot. So I'll concede that. I will concede that. That at least to me, them removing attack from gloves and jewelry means absolutely nothing. It means something to someone else. So by all means, take it off the gear because it means something to that guy or that girl. So it doesn't mean anything to me. Then you made the right decision because you made a decision that impacted somebody. That there was a negative aspect of leaving attack on gloves, where there is no negative aspect for taking attack off of gloves. So you made the right decision and you made the community happy.
Yeah, and overall, I'm still kind of left with a contextual question of does the attack and defense, is it going to get affected by anything? Because it seems like, as you said, it's just there, but it looks like it's just never going to get factored into anything, at least at first assumption, guess.
I mean, it's like they even call that out in the post. Solely picking your items based on attack and defense will almost never be the optimal way to play, but it provides a good starting point for newer players. So all that it is just going through and saying that the higher level item is better at the higher level armor is better at keeping you alive. The higher level weapon is better at doing damage. And then it's up to you, ultimately it's up to the game designers of developing systems to help and guide new players into making those better choices, beyond attack and defense. But I don't think that I think the system that they're going towards and the feeling that I'm getting from the development team for Diablo 4 is that all that those values are there for is to provide a baseline level of offensive and defensive stats, as well as guiding players to give them a reason to want to equip higher level gear. And that is ultimately, what it comes down to. And now a min-maxer might go through and find, well, I know that defense or attack doesn't really mean a lot, so going and equipping this, like level 38 ring or this level 38 armor that has massive resists on it is a lot better than any of the level 40 gear that I found so far. And giving the person that understands the game better that feeling of figuring it out until they just find, a higher level piece of gear that has the stats that they're looking for.
Yeah, if it works that way in the context I presented, then I'm perfectly fine. Because in the beginning of this section, I'm with you. It's like, okay, I'm not saying it's meh, but it's like, okay, it is what it is.
This is one of those ones that you really can't discuss without more context, and they're arbitrary numbers on an arbitrary item that we have no idea what it accounts for. They at least are saying that sure they'll factor into it, but they're not going to be what you ultimately want to pick things for. I would just have to kind of like make an assumption that across, like, all rares will have relatively equal values of defense on them, and so that way the affixes themselves are what's more important than the defense stat. Same goes for weapons. And then at that point, it's like, as long as it's kind of useful across the board, and that those base stats will, if there is an expansion that increases the level cap, just increasing those defense and those attack values will now make me want to go and re-find that same item with these same rolls at the higher level, kind of akin to some of the things that they do in World of Warcraft, or honestly any other MMO or anything else that's supported by expansions, that you have to give me a reason to want to use the higher level gear, and those attack and defense values kind of are that system.
Yeah.
Or yeah, what Phoenix just said in chat: green arrow good, red arrow bad, easy to learn for new players will not mean a better item all around. Exactly. It's just it's going to be one of those things that just like I was saying earlier with the power system. Like, I know I want to play Blizzard, so I need demonic power. and then I kind of understand, oh wow, demonic power increases all of these other things that do like dots and damage and stuff like that. Oh, I get it now, type of thing. It leads you down that path. By you've got the carrot, which is make Blizzard better, which has interesting connotations, making Blizzard better. Yeah. Um, but I know that I need demonic power to do that, and then now I kind of understand a little bit more about, oh, that's what this means. That's what this does, and so it's a great tool for teaching a new player how to play.
Yeah, no, I would agree to that.
There was another question that you had asked a very long time ago that I remember not answering, and now I don't remember what
and
it is.
and it's actually very ironic because we've talked about rares and we've talked about legendaries and how the consumable makes rares like legendaries. And I asked, now that rares can be affixed with the consumable and essentially be legendaries, where do sets fit in this example? Are sets just kind of forgotten? And
No,
we've kind of actually embodied that.
No, I specifically have an answer for that, because going back to hold on, let me open it up again. Nope, I don't want to save image. I want to open image. God. Professional podcast, everybody. So going back, so this is the thing that they showed publicly, but then in the community Q&A, that there's some, I'm not sure if there's an actual recording of it, but there's a lot of people that have given their takes and their feedback on it, and I actually wrote up the bullet points of it over on Diablo Fans. Is that here it makes it look as if legendaries and sets are at the same tier of gear. And now the question of this consumable making, of adding these legendary affixes, on rares into the gearing pool throws that off. Like, well, where does sets factor into that? The comment that Joe Shelley made is that at the time, their current intent was sets would be a introductory system to, once you hit max level, you would equip a set, or you'd be given a set, or sets would be the easier thing to find at kind of like the max level, max-ish level, and that will give you an introduction to skill interactions or how affixes interact with your skills and can change things. But ideally, you will eventually graduate out of sets into customizable legendaries that will allow you to mix and match powers to fit your own playstyle around the skills that you want to use. And so you'll eventually grow out of sets, and that they were just something that hit you at the baseline. I hit level 40, I get my sets, I play around with that for a little bit, and then I found a couple of legendary items that I want for the playstyle that I want. Like, I just want to do straight up like Hydra. I only want to play with Hydra. And so I equip the set that increases Frozen Orb or whatever, and I'm going through, I'm playing that a little bit, but now I've got like 3 items that boost Hydra. I can do the same level of key dungeons now as I did with my set, so I'm just switching over to the Hydra completely and leaving my set behind and never looking back. That is kind of like the idea that we got from the developers, is that it was an introductory experience into how to play the game and how to gear your character, and then after the sets you do pure legendaries. And this system that they're showing plays into that more so than the progression system that we were shown, at BlizzCon. This progression system where legendaries and sets fit the same category. So being able to turn a rare into a legendary fits that better, because that is a question. If legendaries and sets are the same tier, then how does that work? It doesn't,
Yeah, because I said exactly how you eloquently described that. Sets, at least at BlizzCon, were stepping stones into legendaries. So I'm wondering now, with the progression system they have now, where rares can be broad use of term equal to a legendary, if that's going to kind of replace what sets were originally earmarked towards being.
I
because they don't mention with that they're adding more affixes to set pieces. They do magic, rare, and legendaries, but they bypass the set as that intermediate step between rares and legendaries, and that's the only reason I bring it up. And I don't really mind one way or another. I never
I
really,
I just
I never
gotta
really,
I'm just gonna say that you're inferring meaning into the lack of sets being included in that page when that probably is not the case.
yeah, because I could see that the very definition of sets is that they have that. I mean, a set is uniquely different to compare to a rare or a legendary in the way they work, so it may not be the best thing to give them more affixes because their power is innate already in them in comparison,
Mm-hmm.
and giving them more affixes would actually make them potentially stronger than the legendary, and by consequence stronger than a rare, even with a
Uh,
consumable
I
affix.
I think you're just going too deep down the rabbit hole on this one.
It could be, but the
Because
thing
I mean
is,
that's one of those
but
ones.
I'm still wondering if sets are overall higher concept. With the legendary consumable being a rare, and that rare plus consumable being equal to a
I,
legendary. At least
yeah,
right now,
I just
where
want
do
to
sets
say
fit in?
we asked the same question. Basically, we asked the question twice at BlizzCon and got two different answers. That's where sets are completely undecided. They don't even know yet.
I didn't know
So
there was a different answer.
yeah. Well, that's like and the in the panel they said that sets and legendaries are of equal value, and then in the Q&A they said that sets were below legendaries. So that they gave two different answers. So it's one of those ones where they haven't figured it out. Like
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
I
It's just curious. That's all it really is. It's not really a critique on sets or anything. It's just I'm
yeah
interested on the what the new guiding
there
principle is, if there is even a change.
yeah
Are sets still going to be introductory to legendaries, and then
it's
or
definitely
it was cyclical?
I think it's definitely one of those ones where it's like if they don't discuss something in the blog, it's not that they're trying to hide it or that there should be a meaning inferred with them not discussing it. They're not discussing it because they don't know. It's basically it's kind of like a non-issue type thing that they don't even um it's just anything that they like leave out or might not talk about is probably just because they don't have anything to talk about, like because we're literally like that early. Like I
Yeah.
imagine that even if if we go back to the Kotaku article where the game's been like kind of in like this version of the game's been in development since like 2016, and that we're 3 years into the development based on just like the job postings that we've seen over time, where they're mostly like senior and concept level and such, that they probably only got like the engine fully functioning probably like late last year or early this year. Hints also that we saw that like there's the potential that Diablo 4 was supposed to have been announced last year and then kind of got pulled at the last minute. That they couldn't give a functional demo. Like if that is true, it took them a year to get a demo running, on the engine. So the engine itself is
Yeah.
probably still in flux.
Yeah.
So anything that they're not talking about, they're not talking about it because they don't know. Is
Yeah.
the way that I would go.
Yeah. And to answer your question, no one's opinion, do we even really need sets anymore? I guess at this point, uh, even though I don't personally have a problem with sets in D3 because I fully understand what the problem with sets are, and it's not the sets themselves.
Yeah.
I don't think we really do in D4. I think it's
I think their
yeah.
intention from what like Joe Shelley said in that Q&A, that if a set is designed to be an introduction, to end game gearing, I think that is a great purpose for it. Because it's something that any player knows that I'm gonna go through. I find this green piece, I hover over it. Oh, this is Rathma's, gloves, and then there's these set unlocks. If I find Rathma's boots and Rathma's chest, that I know I need to go and try and find those, and it unlocks skills that allows me to play. And, your casual player can follow along with that. They can get that. They can understand it. And so it gives them kind of like that introduction to then like, oh, I need to start breaking out of that and replacing these pieces with legendaries that give me comparable bonuses to what these sets are, or these set bonuses are, but I can get like 2 for the price of 1 or something like that. Or if they wanted to make sets comparable to legendaries, I could see a system, where you have to make major, major concessions in other gearing's aspects to get very specific rewards from it. And like an example would be the Trangol's from Diablo 2, where it actually gave a necromancer or anyone that equipped the first pieces of the set access to sorceress skills. And so it wasn't so much that it affected your own skills and changed your playstyle. It gave you a completely different playstyle that was not capable of being done otherwise. That if they did a set something like that, but maybe more akin to like what Sages does and makes it easier for farming, to where if you have like a Sages set in Diablo 4, where I literally have to give up my power because I'm giving up legendary slots that increase my character power to get an increased drops in crafting mats or something along those lines while I'm out playing the game. Like I could see a set fulfilling that purpose of I'm having to concede player power for a very specific meaning, and then it's up to the developers to define what that meaning is.
Okay, I can see being valid enough. If for a teaching reason, I mean, it's so hard because it's been so long for us, because we're stuck in like, we know D3 in and out, and we're stuck in that mode of understanding D3 and all its intricacies, but we're kind of carrying to whatever degree per person to D4, but we're all novices. We have no idea what the systems are going to be. We have no idea what the interactions are going to be.
I think novices is being too generous when it comes to Diablo 4. I think the developers are novices at this point.
It's like we're like, whether you're like fucking like SVR Theory Crafter or myself, like we're all gonna be on the same page starting our first characters as far as decisions are that we're gonna make, and most likely screw up along the way. So it's like it's hard balancing those two wildly different. It's like you keep your, this is how D3 works. This is how we're basing our assumptions. This is how D2 works. This is how we're basing our assumptions.
Yeah,
and then all. That's
all we can do.
Yeah, and then you're trying to like put yourself into like, well, how would this affect me in D4 starting condition? It's like, context. I need so much more context that we don't have right now.
Yeah, and that's actually one of those ones where it's like, what? Just even getting a more broader approach, which has kind of pushed me to like want to. I always say it, but I kind of want to try, Path of Exile or Grim Dawn, just to get a wider view, more of a perspective than just Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, or hell, there's the new Darksiders Genesis that's coming out that like doesn't even have gear.
Really?
Yeah, it is isometric in view, but it's not really an ARPG. That's the type of game that they were going through and discussing. So, but we are reaching kind of like we're over the 2 hour the 2 hour mark already. So we probably want to kind of get to the point where we're wrapping up. If there's any kind of like closing comments or anything that you wanna state, or something that you didn't get to say that you might have wanted to.
Maybe, but I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad we talked this out. You gave me some better perspectives on things, and I hope maybe I gave you some better perspectives on things.
Yeah,
I could only hope. But no, wrap the sucker up.
Okay, yeah, and with that, I'm definitely interested in hearing your takes on what you feel this itemization blog. Are you already going through and writing me an email? Well, this is why rares need to be useful in the game, and to tell me why I'm wrong. I definitely would go through and love to hear it. Because that's even just like the power system of having those gear concessions. Like, I definitely have to say I'm a lot more open to it because of conversations that I had with No One's Minion at BlizzCon. Coming from like the Path of Exile point of view, it's like, okay, I can see that. That's definitely, that's a very good point. Things of that nature. So I'm definitely interested in hearing, what you, the listener, what your take is on these things. So by all means, drop me an email, westmarchworkshop@blizzpro.com. And what do you feel about the direction that we are kind of seeing the ship start to take for the itemization in Diablo 4? Do you like where it's going? Do you want them to tack harder? Is there things that you experienced in another game that you'd like to see them implement instead? Just let me know. And again, that's westmarchworkshop@blizzpro.com. Or you can follow the show at the WM Workshop on Twitter. I will be streaming here at twitch.tv/BlizzPro. Currently, I can't say every other Wednesday because I believe the next episode is also going to be on a Thursday for those that tune in live. So it's probably going to be Thursday the 19th as opposed to Wednesday the 18th. But yeah, just keep an eye on the Twitter, and I'll go through and keep people updated so they can go and catch the show. But it's always going to be here at twitch.tv/BlizzPro around 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. By all means, you can go through and you can join us, in game. We're the BlizzPro clan or the Westmarch Workshop community. And you can also find a lot of the things that we talk about here and more over at diablo.blizzpro.com. You can find more stuff from me. Follow me on Twitter at Neinball Gamer. I stream once every century at twitch.tv/Neinball. I am running out of higher levels of time with which to make that joke with. I say that having now actually streamed like in the past 2 weeks. So, and looking to stream again this next weekend. So we'll go through and see how that works out. Yeah. Dred, where can the lovely people at home find yourself?
You lovely folks can find me on Twitter at Dredscythe. I'll hopefully be able to resume some form of podcasting with the Scythe and Shield Rebirth podcast at scytheandshield.com. You can get all the information, where to listen to the show there. Holidays are holidays, and scheduling is difficult for interviewees and myself, so may have to kind of put a hiatus and catch up in the new year. But yeah, that's where you can find me and the podcast itself.
Yeah, very nice. So that's gonna go through and close us out here. And then the more of the shameless self-plug, you can also find my writing over at diablofans.com, and then I was on the most recent episode of the Diablo podcast over on Diablo and Gamers. I talk about Diablo a lot.
Yeah, you do.